careful. So welcome to the 11th AGM of the principals. It's wonderful to see you all here. As you know, we decided that after several years of doing the event only virtually, the AGM, we're doing it in hybrid format. We'll be doing the annual conference of the principals in November in Tokyo. That will be a very big event, but again, it's wonderful to be able to see all of you here today in London, in addition during London Climate Week, so the timing is very good. This is the at least third time, I think, that we've been hosted by the EBRD. It was the inaugural one. We then had a AGM and conference just after COVID. It was the first time that we all got back together. So here we are in 2025 once again in the new building of the EBRD. It was a very good choice. We knew the previous one. I think, as I said a few years ago, it's always with some emotion that I come to the EBRD because I am a former banker at the EBRD. I was employee 200 and something. I worked with Jacques de la Rosière. I worked with Jacques Attali. It was a pioneering time. And the EBRD is a remarkable institution, and it is really, I think, a model for many development banks, multilateral and regional banks. It's really a very influential institution. The EBRD has also played an important role in the governance of the principles. It's been chaired by Isabelle Laurent of the EBRD for several years, who's done an extraordinary job, if I may compliment you, Isabelle. Generally speaking, the multilateral development banks, of course, were at the origin of the sustainable bond market and have continued to play an essential role, both in the governance and also as issuers. Odile RENAUD-BASSO has kindly agreed to present. I was saying to her that this is the third time, actually, that she opens the principles. One as Directrice Générale du Trésor in Paris. We're at the Bourse. It was a breakthrough event, actually, for the principals. Again, in 2021, just after COVID, and the third time. So, Odile, thank you once again for hosting us. Thank you for doing the introduction. C'est à vous.
So I'm very happy to welcome you all here in our new building. Now, we've been there for a few years, but a very sustainable and green building. And it's, a pleasure for us to host you and to host this AGM of the principals. It's very, we are very happy to do so also because our mandate is closely aligned with the goals of the principles of directing capital to environmentally and socially sound and sustainable investments that foster transition to net zero emission economies, protect the environment, and strengthen equality of opportunity, including through access to vital services. We live in a difficult world and in a challenging geopolitical environment. It's obvious, but when we think about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the conflict of the Middle East, it's clear that they have caused devastation, human devastation, severe impacts on lives and livelihoods, with a terrible cost on human people, environmental, and far beyond the direct impact of the immediate conflict zones. And against this geopolitical backdrop and economic pressures, the higher upfront costs of the green transitions are competing with what we see now in the politicians' understandable focus on boosting defense spending and addressing energy and food inflation. And we've seen a whole commitment by NATO countries yesterday to step up to increase military expenditures. And yet, we know that the effects of climate change are increasingly evident and are being felt now by populations across the globe, across the world in everyday life. And the intensity and frequency of the damaging impacts are rising. We also know that defense and security is about so much more than the ability to respond militarily. It includes also long-term sustainable energy supplies, food security, access to clean water, and the resilience of vital infrastructure, housing, transportation, and healthcare. That's why we must stay focused on the objectives articulated in the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement, which we have collectively pursued over the last decade. And capital markets are a critical tool in realizing and implementing this agenda, bringing innovative financing tools and the vital private sector investment that they can harness. Over the past decade, the principles have shown that transparency and disclosure are fundamental to the integrity and growth of the global labeled sustainable bond market. A key factor in this success is, I believe, that the principles do not prescribe a specific definition of sustainable investment through any minimum threshold or impact measurement. And this is critical to account for project context in the assessment. Instead, the focus on transparent information allows investors to assess issuers' sustainability claims, the project's level of ambition, and the likelihood of the stated goals being delivered. The flexibility of process guidelines has allowed issuers to finance projects across the globe, including in emerging markets where needs are greatest. Last year alone, over $900 billion in issuance aligned with the principles was generating across 6 continents. So this is big, but however, this is far short of the identified needs, and we must continue to step up and to increase our efforts. First, we must avoid falling into false dichotomies, such as choosing between defense spending and the urgent need to build sustainable, inclusive economies that can reduce both external and internal sources of conflict. Likewise, we should not pit short-term adjustment costs against investments that address both immediate and long-term risks from climate change and environmental degradation. We must also ensure that concerns around impact washing do not give rise to excessive and unnecessary costs of reporting and undue risks of litigations that will limit the quantum of investment. And this is a very difficult balance to reach, but a very important balance to reach, I think. Data reporting should be focused on material risks and impacts and should avoid short-term year-on-year measurements that may hamper the ability of markets to support the hard-to-abate sector. We must also avoid geographic fragmentation of financial flows, recognizing that a global problem requires global investments. Beyond its global reach, the credibility that the principles have built over the past decade under ICMA careful stewardship stems largely from the inclusive representation of all key market stakeholders across its various committees. The ongoing dialogue among issuers, investors, bond underwriters, and other key market participants, such as law firms, rating agencies, SPO providers, stock exchanges, and NGOs, helps to ensure that the developed guidance strikes a careful balance between robustness, ambition, and pragmatism. This approach also acknowledges the uncertainties, including how emerging technologies may shape our path forward. And we've seen in the last few years how technological development can change the cost-benefit, the appetite, and so forth. So we need to remain open to any technological development changes. So against this background, I really wish you a successful AGM. I hope this will cement the basis for the productive next decade. And you can count on EBRD commitment and support to continue to offer our wholehearted support for this shared objective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Odile, and thank you for hosting us today. Maybe a short word about the agenda for today. So we have already listened to the welcome remarks from Odile. I will present you in a second the result of the election of the Executive Committee. Then my colleague Nicolas Pfaff will moderate a panel with the chair and the co-chair of the Executive Committee to present an overview of the work achieved so far. Then we will have a presentation of one of the key deliverables of this year, which is a practitioner guide for sustainable bonds for nature. Then a short coffee break. And then each of the coordinators of the working group will present briefly the outcome of this year, starting with green enabling, then impact reporting, sustainability-linked loan financing bonds, and sustainability-linked bonds, climate transition finance. Short words as well on the advisory council of the principals. Then we will have an interactive session, Q&A plus Slido to interact and to get some comments from you, and then having a drinks all together. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm happy to present and to announce the result of the election of the Executive Committee. This process is well established. Each organization that is a member of the principal is eligible and can submit its candidacy to the elections. The elections take place on an annual basis during the months of May and June, and it is to renew by half the Executive Committee. Following a call for candidacy during spring, ICMA registered 27 candidates, 10 issuers, 4 investors, and 13 underwriters. This year, the election took place from the 26th of May until the 20th of June through an electronic ballot. In accordance with the governance framework, only members are entitled to vote. They have been asked to select 4 candidates per category. The participation rate is very good this year, 62% of voters, which is the highest percentage ever reached. We can see from the statistics presented here in the pie chart that the mobilization was especially high among issuers. So this is the composition of the 24 members of the 2024 Executive Committee. And in orange, you can see the seats that were for re-elections. Since the number of candidates for the investor category was equal to the number of seats to be filled in, the 4 candidates are seen de facto elected to join the 2025 Executive Committee without any need for a vote. So Amundi, BNP Paribas Asset Management, PIMCO, and SEB Asset Management will join BlackRock, Mirova, T. Rowe Price, and Zurich Insurance. Among the 10 candidates who put themselves forward in the issuer category, 2 members of the Executive Committee have been renewed in their mandate, EBRD and Iberdrola, and 2 multilateral development banks have been newly elected. CAF, that is essentially based in Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Council of Europe Development Bank. They will join EIB, IFC, NIB, and the World Bank. And among the 13 candidates in the underwriter category, 3 members of the executive committee have been renewed in their mandate, BofA Securities, JP Morgan Securities, and Natixis. And 1 has been newly elected, ING, but ING is not really a newcomer. ING was an ExCom member in 2019 and 2020. So welcome back. And they will join BNP Paribas, Crédit Agricole, HSBC, and SEB. Elected organizations are consequently ExCom members for a term expiring at the end of the ordinary general meeting in 2027. Congratulations to the lucky winners. On behalf of the Secretariat, I would like to warmly thank Agence Française de Développement, NL, and DZ Bank for their great contribution over those past years. Thank you, and over to you, Nicolas.
Thank you very much, Valérie. And let me just pause also to thank Valérie for all the extraordinary work she does in support of the Secretariat. You know, I go around saying I'm the Secretary of the Principals, but actually it's Valérie who is, in effect, the Secretary of the Principals. So thank you again, Valérie. Now, I'm going to do a quick overview, and then we'll have a panel with the steering. You know, the challenge for us is going to be not to over-anticipate on what the working groups are saying, so we'll try to keep that balance. And also we have another challenge, which is Alban was caught in the Eurostar, and he's going to try to make it in time. So let's see if it all works out. Now, a few slides as an introduction to the panel. Here is an overview of the principles within green, the updates this year. As you can see, you know, we continue to be very busy. I would particularly highlight the work on sustainable bonds for nature. We will spend a significant amount of time on that, but also additional guidance for green enabling, as well as for sustainability-linked loan refinancing bonds is very important, and Alban's just made it, so we're going to be fine. The other thing that I wanted to mention, which is new in this diagram, is the bottom, which is the wider debt capital market guidance. And I think that's important because, as you may be aware, you know, with the principles and the wider footprint of the principles, we've had dialogue, particularly with other ICMA committees who, you know, oversee other segments of the market or other products. And so over time, we've added high-yield SLBs, we've added sustainable commercial paper and repo and sustainability. And then, you know, talking about other important debt markets, you know, last year we added green, social, and sustainability sukuk. So this is not new news, but for the first time, we're visually representing it to give you the idea that, you know, the principles obviously is primarily about the debt capital market, about bonds, but there's actually, you know, a very significant influence, you know, to the wider debt capital, sorry, the wider debt financing markets. Now, we also wanted today to give you a sense of the wider work of the ExCom with the support of ICMA, in addition to the best practice guidance, which is covered in the previous slide. We have targeted regulatory engagement with the support of the ExCom. ICMA has a very significant activity with regulators. But just to say, the ExCom, when warranted, participates. And, you know, particularly there was a big thing in 2024 around the ESMA's guidelines for sustainable fund naming, and, you know, we'll come back again to that. When we talk about, you know, market topics, you know, clearly the ExCom covers these topics, and you wouldn't be surprised that we had several discussions about the EUGB. Again, this might come up later. That was a significant development. And of course, we have discussed also topics like defense, and I'll come back to that in a second. Finally, you know, governance is a big part of what we do. I think one of the strengths of the principles is, you know, how structured and how rigorous our governance is. You know, an illustration, of course, is, you know, today, you know, all of you together, the elections, et cetera. I mean, this is a very transparent, very well organized, and I would argue very democratic initiative. Now, coming to defense, you know, Odile, in her introductory speech, mentioned this. Unfortunately, the new geopolitical realities are such that, you know, none of us can ignore, you know, conflicts, the issue of defense. This has been underlined over the last few days in the Middle East. We already had the situation in Ukraine, but again, we live in interesting times and uncertain times. Now, how this relates to us is, there has been some questions in the market and some jurisdictions about, well, what's the link between defense and sustainability? And we have, after much discussion, put together a document, a Q&A, which will be published today. And we're going to talk about this further, but in a nutshell, I think we've tried to say three things. First, there's no conflict between defense and sustainability. Second, financing defense projects and sustainable bonds is not something which has been covered historically and not something which we foresee as being directly covered, particularly when we talk about weapons. This is specifically here. And conversely, of course, social bonds and sustainability bonds, however, through social financing have always and will continue to address the effects of conflicts, displaced populations, et cetera. Now, this was already out there, but we thought it was important to reaffirm it. And again, I won't say anything more because we'll be covering this topic. Further illustration of the wider work of, and here more emphasis perhaps on the Secretariat. I was talking about regulatory engagement. We regularly publish, either of our own initiative or in relation to consultations. I mentioned ESMA guidelines. There's also regulation of ESG ratings providers. And importantly, we provided input, and my colleague Oscar Altun was very active with me on this front with respect to simplification of EU legislation. As you know, that's been a sort of ongoing drama. It continues right now. Every morning we have a new update about what's happening in simplification. There's a lot of argument within Europe. So we're trying to follow and provide positive input into that debate. And then finally, we do, I would say, wider thought leadership. Last year was transition finance. This year was on the sustainable fund market. We're preparing other papers on carbon markets, on ESG ratings. So we try also to sort of have a sort of think tank type approach, or at least thought leadership approach on general issues in sustainable finance. Finally, I'm just going to finish with the governance. Last year we reformed our governance. There's a smaller number of observers and members, and this is again because we moved to create a situation of fairness in terms of which of our members and observers were actually paying versus those that aren't, and this in particular relationship to whether you're a member of ICMA or not. The great majority of you are members of ICMA, but we're open more widely, and I just wanted to mention that because that's where we have a significant dip from 2023. But what's interesting is you can see membership of the principals has actually been going up again, which I think is a very positive development. And then, I think the remarkable engagement on the last election, 62% participation, is an illustration that those of you who are now in the governance of the principals, members and observers are very engaged. And so I think that, this is one of the benefits is that we've got a very, wide, but at the same time very relevant and very committed membership, including with observers. With that, I'm going to call to the stage the members of the chairs of the executive committee. So, of course, Isabelle Laurent, who is our chair, Agnès Gourc, vice chair, and Alban de Fay, who just got here on time, also vice chair. Here we are. So what we're going to try to do here, again, is not overlap too much with the subsequent discussions. Again, you'll be seeing each working group that will go into more detail. But we thought, to start with, it would make sense to ask the chairs, what's their perception of the work that we've done this year? What's the key takeaway from their side? And I'll start perhaps with you, Agnès.
Are we starting me? Okay, it's okay. No, I was just thinking, you're never meant to have a favorite child, so we'll have to pick. First of all, thank you very much for being here. Hopefully many more of you online. It's always an important time in the year for the entire market. I think definitely I would say the topic that will be covered just after we finished our quick chat and the new guidance we have on nature related. For me, it's been another interesting time where we see really how we embed in this market other concepts actually and thank you very much really to the IFC and the World Bank and Simon and the Secretariat for spearheading that effort, and all the other contributors from the ExCom. Well, it was quite impressive. That I hadn't foreseen, I must say, is that, of course, we already have in the Green Bond Principles the conservation category. As we all know, it hasn't been massively allocated in the market. But with the extensive discussion, actually, with in particular IFC and World Bank and the other rangers that were on the table in the discussions, the coming Montreal frameworks actually have a different approach to what we use typically in our use of proceeds world. And it has been about how we reconcile those two approaches. That is actually a more broader approach with the use of proceeds, and how we keep kind of this focus on transparent allocation, impact reporting, while maintaining the true vision effectively of the Kunming-Montreal framework. So that has been an interesting process, and hopefully it gives really the basis for more transparent investment allocation to this type of projects. What I will briefly say before I pass on to Isabelle is definitely, and it was interesting to hear Odile mentioning effectively that balanced approach and really taking into consider obviously the broader developments and environment we operate in. I think it's always important to remember that what we do across a 12-month period, pretty much when we have a new ExCom being elected, is definitely developing new guidelines where we feel there is a need in the market, and a nature-related one is one of those. But also how we look at enhancement when there needs to be clarification. As you will see, we have further Q&A, we have the checklist with green enabling, but also outreach when we feel there may be some narrative or messaging in the market that somehow it is lost, because you are very well aware of it, and we'll touch upon it maybe on the defense question. There is a way we have to write things in those documents, and there is the behind discussion actually that went into that wording. And so, for example, what the SLB working group is doing with the webinars, the next one I think will be flagged a bit later, but coming up soon, is very important in terms of outreach and really kind of convey the messaging behind all these numerous texts. You had the number in mind the other day that we have on the website that can be a bit dense. Yeah.
Isabelle Fortuna, apologies for breaking protocol. It wasn't on purpose. So over to our chair, Isabelle.
You said it was very kind of strict governance, and then you break protocol.
I broke.
No, I'm delighted that Agnès has said pretty much what I would say. So I could end up just saying ditto. I do want to thank everybody for all their hard work over the course of the year. And I suppose the thing that seems most important to me is, I think what was reflected in Odile's speech is that constant strive for recognition that we've got a global market and that we need to be ambitious, but we need to also be pragmatic. And that's why it's very helpful that we've got all the constituencies represented through either the ExCom and the advisory group, but also in the working group. And it's also a spur for greater clarity. So we've got lots more Q&A. We've got developments in terms of new KPIs. We've tried to bring together some of the guidance that's already there, including for questions that we often receive on things like allocation reporting. So not just impact reporting, and trying to bring it together in one place, because over the years we've produced a body of guidance that is often disparate. Some in the harmonized framework for impact reporting, some in pre-issuance checklists, some in the principles themselves, and trying to bring them all together to make it easier for people to access and to understand what is still meant to be understood by an ambitious and robust issuance for supporting both the green and the social. And I think this year also the new guidance that's been provided with metrics by the Social Bond Working Group, who've also put together, I think, some webinars that have reached out, focusing on essential services. And I think it was highlighted that in these difficult times, the idea of access to essential services is of great importance in terms of bringing populations together and ensuring that we focus on security, but in different aspects to those that are often talked about in terms of the military and other aspects of defense. So I think this year has been a very active year, but we learn as much from the dialogue that we have across the different segments of the market and from different geographies. And I think it's the whole process that has been enriching and allowing us to keep driving forward. So really grateful to see many of you here in person as well as online. And thank you for all the hard work that's been done by all the different parts of the principles, whether investors, underwriters, issuers, but all the others in the advisory group and the working group that keep us on our toes. And thank you, if I may, also at this point to the Secretariat for all the push that they give. I don't think we'd meet any deadlines if it weren't for the sort of getting the whip out at the last minute. Without it, including the responses that we've had to do over the course of the year. And I think I'm so grateful for all the organization that you put together. And when we're last minute trying to produce all the guidance and get it published in time is also a very last minute bit, but you really do bring it all together. So thank you so much. And Alban, over to you.
No, all the key messages are already given, I would say. For me, first of all, it's a very great pleasure to be here. It was tough to arrive, but and for me, Nature Guide is a very important step, and I want to talk about our ecosystem. We are all together a very nice ecosystem with different interests, different appetite, and all the work we do every year. Sometimes it's not a big changes, but every year we put a little small additional stone, and it will all this principle, and every year is better and better, and we are able to take into account what is missing, new thematics that we have to address. So thank you to all of you for your involvement. We already talked about involvement, but we know that what we produce, it's additional work for all the ExCom members. So thank you for that. And we done an impressive job. If we look behind us, all the work we done and the results, the size of the market, there is a lot of to do. So we have a lot of topic to work on. The other key message is that we are very happy to be re-elected. The competition was not so difficult this year, so we need more investor involved. Sometimes investors are in front of underwriter and issuer, so we need more investors. So it's a key message here today. If you are not already involved in the ExCom, please think about it for next year. We need some diversification in this area. We need help, so you can be involved in different working groups. So yes, it will be my two key messages today. Thank you for all your work, for all your involvement, and for investors I represent here today. Do not hesitate to step up on the different working group and to put your candidate next year.
Can I add something to your point, Alban? without trying to put it in a controversial way, I think investors are the driving force behind this market, in the sense that for issuers, hopefully Isabel and the other issuers around in the room will corroborate. I mean, it's really key to be in a position to say, actually, this is the type of investors we've attracted in our transactions by going to the GSS bond market. And so, you know, all investors that do a lot in this market, I think it's really the time to be even more vocal than you've ever been. So we do have, you know, that positive momentum that carries on in the market. So I'll need to relay your point, Abo. I'm not saying kind of, you know, issuers are doing probably the brunt of the bulk of the job, but we need investors kind of behind that market to really be vocal about what they do as well.
Thank you. Now, we're running slightly beyond time, so I'm going to ask you to be concise. There's 3 points we wanted to cover. Most importantly, I think, Isabel, can you comment further on our statement on defense?
Thank you. So we spent a lot of time discussing the defense issue. I think we had 3 or 4 goes at really coming out with wording that supports it. Some people said, did we even need to write anything? But I think one of the points about the integrity of the bond market, and especially with process guidelines, is the idea that the more one can bring clarity to issuers about what is accepted, the less likely it is that there is reputational risk for issuers and for the market as a whole in terms of the way to think about it, which is the whole basis for the guidance that we've been producing. Of course, when you're process guidelines and voluntary guidelines, we never explicitly say this is not acceptable or this is acceptable. What we try to do is explain what the issues are and the philosophy that we've tried to engender through the principles. So really, when we started with the discussion, it was going back to what are we trying to do with the principles? We're trying to ensure that we're funneling money to things that are most impactful in relation to environmental issues and social issues. And we do that with a focus on transparency of information. And secondly, with the ability to ensure that we're not doing it at the expense of other things. So we've always had a slightly different way of conceiving do no significant harm than some specific metric or threshold. But that's always been part of what the principles has focused on, is trying to achieve a positive gain not at the expense of other things, and that risks are managed and mitigated. So when we take the issue of defense, it's certainly correct to say that defense and security aren't inherently problematic from the perspective of sustainability, and you can assess sustainability characteristics of defense companies or issuers without actually seeing a direct contradiction. But the minute you get down into the aspects of what is a substantial good with no significant harm, and how you ensure the necessary transparency around these things, that's the reason why we consider that GSS bonds are not the right mechanism for doing so. We also had discussions with many investors in order to try and assess whether or not it was indeed the case that the GSS bond market would not readily support such issuance. And certainly we've tried to give clarity that that is indeed the case, that most investors, certainly the ones that we canvassed, do not believe that they would support such issuance in their portfolios. So in coming out with this Q&A, we were trying to guide the market in the clearest possible way as to why that is an issue, and to try and avoid any reputational risk for issuers who are trying to go down that route, or for the market itself. And that way, we hope that we can support sustainability going forward in a clear way.
Thank you, Isabelle. Alban, I mentioned our regulatory engagement work, and I'd like you to comment on the new ESMA rules on fund naming, because we did have a bit of a scare in the market, and I sort of like your impression of where we've landed and what's been the impact.
Thank you, Nicola. Yes, it was a very great achievement with a lot of work, and thank you for the Secretariat and Osgo. To be short, last year ESMA announced a new rule for what we call ESMA naming. So if you have a fund with green climate, you have to implement some exclusion, what we call the Paris-aligned benchmark exclusion. So you have to exclude, in a nutshell, all sectors that are high emitted in terms of greenhouse gas. Without taking into account the value of green bond. So whatever the issuer, we have to exclude it. So if you have a green bond, you cannot invest in an issuer from this sector, even if it's a green bond. For us, it was very harming the green bond market. There was an opportunity to develop the market, and this regulator don't see this opportunity. So we have to work and to provide some key messages. And I remind that last August, when we tried to estimate the probability that ESMA take into account our request, we estimate that it was very, very small, let's say 5%. At the end, ESMA announced last December that we can implement this exclusion not at the issuer level, but also at the use of proceed level. And we have to do it for all use of proceed, not only for green bond from issuers that are excluded from PIB. So behind this result, a very nice work done by the ICMA and all of you to provide what we want behind this new regulation. So it was a very great achievement. It's very positive for the market. It means that thanks to this opportunity, we can remind that we can help issuers with in the highest emitted carbon sector thanks to this financial instrument, and it highlights the value of this instrument.
Yes, thank you, Alban. Thank you for the kind words. And I must say it was interesting to see how the whole market came together. There was tremendous feedback across the board, including individual organizations here in the room, but also some really interesting dialogue with the national regulators. There was significant difference in interpretation among national regulators and ESMA, and there was a really important dialogue that went on there. So I think ESMA then finally decided, in light of all this, that they should, and this is quite rare, that they should change their opinion. I'm going to finish, Agnès, with you. Again, we've got a time constraint, but we've been looking backwards. As mentioned, we've got the Principals Annual Conference coming up. What would you like to say in terms of things that we can be, looking forward to?
Yeah, which is a first, actually, where we have indeed the AGM and the conference with a few months apart. The benefit is that, as you were highlighting earlier, Isabelle, we always kind of scramble 4 times at the last minute before the AGM to try to finish as much as we can. The one working group where you won't have any publications today is on the climate transition finance. And so that's definitely where the deliverables would be expected more kind of at the November conference. You have the date. I think you'll probably remind everybody of that. November 6th. Okay. November 6th. And I think probably for the sector, but for everyone that may be involved in the conference, if those of you in the membership on the observer side, when if you're attending in person, that would be probably helpful as well. So we'll cover that a bit more on the climate transition finance working group later. So I won't add too much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our steering. They do extraordinary work. They've got day jobs. Let's give them a round of applause for all their contributions. I'm now going to call my colleague Simon Untermark, who's the Senior Director in our team at ICMA. She's been doing some fantastic work in terms of what we've tried to highlight in the new diagram, showing the wider footprint. And last year you led the Sukuk, you were also involved in the Blue Bond, and here you are again today, and it's Nature Bonds. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, and I'd also like to call Irina on stage. So good afternoon, everyone in the room. Good afternoon, everyone watching us online. We are very excited indeed to present this new, our biggest deliverable at this AGM to you, a Sustainable Bond for Nature, a Practitioner's Guide. And I should say this has been, like everything, all the updates have already been released at 1:30 when the AGM started, in case you haven't seen it yet. And there are also QR codes outside on the tables where you can go in the break and scan the link to the Nature Guide directly. So just to give you a very brief background, because we don't have a lot of time, last year, following the other guides that Nicholas just mentioned, the ExCom decided, well, perhaps there should be, following market requests, of course, there should be some practitioner guide on nature and biodiversity as well. And the decision was made during the strategy meeting in September that this would be an ExCom-only task force. Which is why you couldn't find it on the website, and I was very pleased to coordinate that following my experience with the other guides. So it's a bit like herding cats sometimes, bringing together so many people, but it always helps, having learned from mistakes that were made perhaps during other processes. I'm here today with one of the core contributors. I don't want to mention everyone individually, but we had a task force, ExCom only. We were joined by UNEP-FI as an observer. And we're also, by the way, in the guide acknowledging and thanking other organizations that were kind enough to provide their feedback to us during the drafting process. So why did we do that? And let me just actually reveal the cover to you in case you haven't spotted it on the table yet. So the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which for those of you not that familiar with the topic is basically the equivalent to the Paris Agreement, estimates that we need 700 billion annually. There have been even higher estimates since by the likes of Bloomberg and others of $1.1 trillion to finance the transformation that we need, that the economy needs to undergo to reverse nature loss by 2030. And really one of the main instruments to finance this, as we already see on the climate side as well, are sustainable bonds. So hence it made sense to come out with this guide. That's not to say that you couldn't already finance nature and biodiversity under the green bond principles, but this just gives you a little bit more of an idea as to what could be financed. So you see the table of contents shows 3 chapters. So we explain what could be financed under use of proceeds bonds. Irina will go into the chapters in a little bit more detail. You have more details on impact reporting indicators. And also the guide alludes to how KPIs under sustainability linked bonds could be used to finance nature-themed bonds. So one thing I really want to highlight, because we talk about nature and biodiversity, but you will have, of course, noticed that the guide is only called Sustainable Bonds for Nature. And this is really because really early on in the chapters, when you look at the guide, we clarified that, well, first of all, we see these terms being used interchangeably in the market, so we really wanted to define them. And what we did, we looked at 2 main definitions, one from the IPBES, which is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Again, for those of you not that familiar with the jargon, it's basically like the IPCC on the climate side. And we looked at how they define nature, and then on biodiversity, we looked at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, how they define that term. From that, put into plain language, it followed that biodiversity is really the living part of nature, all plants and animals, while nature is all of our natural world, living plus all other inanimate components that comprise our planet, such as geology, water, air, and climate. So that's why from those definitions on, the guide only talks about nature, which includes biodiversity. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Irina.
Thank you, Simone, and I want to thank all the partners in the task force that worked with us on this guidance. It has been a privilege to represent IFC in this work. So the sustainable bonds for nature define nature-related projects as those that may contribute to conservation and restoration of biodiversity, natural ecosystems, and ecosystem services, projects that contribute to the transformation of economic activities to address one or more of the key drivers of biodiversity loss. Again, those have been defined by the science. And there are 5 key drivers of biodiversity loss. These are land and sea use change, overexploitation of resources, pollution, spread of invasive species, and climate change. Integration of nature-based solutions across economic sectors. So this is perhaps could be less familiar concept, but think of using a constructed wetland for water purification instead of the traditional way of chemical treatment of water, as an example. And the implementation of initiatives and for sovereigns that could be policy, tools and activities that support the activities A through C. So one of the key contributions of this guidance is to provide a list of indicative nature-related projects across all 10 of the eligible categories for green bond principles, not just for the terrestrial and aquatic biodiversity conservation. As Agnes said in the previous panel, this is a major contribution to give guidance to the market of what does it look like to have whole of economy transformation that the global biodiversity framework calls for us to be able to stop and reverse nature loss by 2030. Impact reporting is absolutely critical for the transparency and integrity in this market. So this guidance includes, in addition to indicative list of eligible projects, it talks about how each of these different projects could meet the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework, either directly or indirectly, and also provides a list of impact indicators that could be used to measure the outcomes of this project and the impact on nature. The vast majority of these indicators come from the existing harmonized framework for impact reporting. And in cases where the existing metrics were not quite demonstrating the impact of proposed eligible activities, the working group proposed additional impact indicators. Given that the impact on nature is always localized, the issuers are encouraged to provide additional context in measuring their impact on nature, to talk about the local context of the projects, to set up baselines, and use benchmarks where possible to compare their contribution to the positive impact on nature. In addition to obviously, the use of proceeds is the heart of this document, but also this document provides additional guidance of what sustainability-linked bonds could look like in the space. And it provides guidance on the selection of key performance indicators that are material to companies' sustainability strategies and material to their core business operations. So it talks about that nature-related KPIs should be contributing to those broad categories of what we define as nature-related projects. So restoration and conservation of biodiversity, ecosystems, and ecosystem services. An example of a KPI in this area could be area of habitats protected or restored. Reduction of one or more of the direct drivers of biodiversity and ecosystem services loss in economic activity. An example of the KPI could be quantity of pollutants in the water discharged or water withdrawal rates. Integration of nature-based solutions across economic sectors. It could be an area of mangroves under restoration for coast stabilization, as an example. And implementation of initiatives, tools and activities to support activities listed above, An example could be technology that is used to promote zero deforestation. In addition, the document provides considerations of different resources that could be used for the calibration of sustainability performance targets. And issuers are encouraged to also communicate expected and observed impacts wherever possible under the sustainability-linked bond framework for projects related to nature.
Thank you very much. At this, I think our 10 minutes are way over. We're already a bit of time, but as I said, please download the QR code or check the website. You might have also received an email from ICMA Communications. And please spread it widely on social media and everywhere, and use it as well. We want to see more nature-themed bonds. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Arina. We've got a 20-minute break, and then we will restart sharp with a presentation of the working group. So see you, and please be back in 20 minutes.